not only is he a great guy, he helps organization make stuff happen. And in his presentation, I'm not going to steal his thunder, but through his personal experiences, he'll help share what understanding the difference between the need for clarity versus certainty. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Part of the service.
Yeah. Thanks, you guys.
Everybody but Gino.
So I got to pick one side or the other because of the light here. So since you guys are the only table over there, I'll probably be spending more time over here. So feel free to shift if you want to. So thanks, Jeff, and I appreciate all the sponsors of Citizen Bank for creating this opportunity to be able to share my story. So a number of years ago, my personal and professional life came colliding together in a way that I really didn't anticipate, to what Jeff alluded to. And it came together in a way where I started to really learn about clarity, connection, and commitment, and how that really shows up on really high-performing teams, and how our own individual fears tend to get in the way of being able to get at any one of those three. And I learned, I think, more in the first minute of my son's life than I did the rest of my life combined. And the reason for that is because at about our 22-week ultrasound, we went in thinking that our biggest decision that we were going to be making was, do we want to know the sex of this kid? Right? Pretty typical thing. Do we want to go in? We want to know the sex of this kid. So we went in, and we had just been in Mexico for 2 weeks with my wife's family. So we were feeling pretty happy and tanned and relaxed. And this was December 26th, so it was the holiday season, and all things were good. And about 15 minutes into the ultrasound, the tech is looking up at the screen, and she stops for a little bit and looks up and says, something's not right here. I think the stomach's in the wrong place. I'll be right back. And she left the room. Just like that. And it felt like a long time, but it was about 15 minutes and went by, and she and the doctor came back in, and the doctor came in and said, yep, sorry to tell you, the tech is right, the stomach's in the wrong place. And I've been doing some calculations, and as a result of my calculations, I've actually called some of my colleagues. And I'm sorry to tell you, but your kid here has a really severe birth defect. And based on my discussions and my calculations, it has best 25% chance of survival. And if it does survive, it's going to be short and ugly. And you're at 22 weeks. And you probably need to get an abortion, because the amount of time it's going to take to get any more data, there's not going to be a hospital that will legally give you an abortion once you get all this data back. So you need to decide now. And this is where the learning started to happen. And what I didn't realize at the time is that it was also a big journey around collaboration. So it was not an isolated journey. And that collaboration started with my wife and I in that moment, in our relationship and the decisions that we're making together. And what we didn't know at the time is we got invited on this journey to really participate on a team that had just gone through some major barriers of themselves to get to a new place that now was producing the best results in the world. So we left that appointment kind of in pretty distraught, didn't really know where to go from there. I don't remember much of that day. My wife at the time was a professor at the University of Minnesota. She was advising these PhD students, and within 24 hours we had a stack of paper about all the data there is to know around this particular birth defect, which is called CDH, or congenital diaphragmatic hernia. It was kind of interesting, actually. This month is CDH Awareness Month, and so here I am. I didn't realize that until a couple days ago. And so it's called congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And his birth defect, he had an extreme case of it. So he didn't have any diaphragm, in utero, he didn't have any diaphragm. And so his intestines, his stomach, his pancreas, and his liver floated up into his chest, pushed his heart to the wrong side, and didn't allow his lungs to grow. So that was the decision that we had in front of us. And the data that came back looked like this. You don't have to read all that. But here's what was coming back. Life-threatening anomaly. Mortality rate of 40 to 50%. He had an extreme case, so the mortality rate was quite a bit less, was more than that. Many complications. This is where I start not being able to pronounce things. Pulmonary damage, cardiovascular disease, gastrointestinal disease, neurocognitive defects, pulmonary morbidity, obstructive and restrictive lung function, long-term consequences, Barrett's esophagus, oral aversion, this one I love, failure to thrive. So these are the things that were coming back that we had to step into. So we had a decision to make. So I'm curious to see if this is a relevant conversation in the room. So have any of you ever been going down thinking things were good, plan in place, and all of a sudden it goes really sideways? Has that ever happened to you? Yeah? Yeah? So when that happens and you don't have time to get more information, how do you make a decision?
Gut.
Gut. So, gut. What else?
Depend on experts.
So depend on experts. Okay. What else? Come on, it's a small group. We'll talk about why none of you are willing to put up your voice right at the moment. These fears that are going on right now.
Pray.
Huh?
Pray.
Pray? Yeah. Get into my faith. What do I believe in? Yeah. What informs your gut, Stu?
What informs my gut? Is it the same thing as my instinct?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a feeling. It's a.
So what do you think?
Probably
How do you get to your
my
gut?
past experiences.
Yeah, past experiences.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How else? So how would you? Things go totally sideways. How would you make a decision? And do you feel like you've prepared enough to make an effective one? What might you need to prepare to make an effective decision when things go sideways?
Others.
Rick.
You gather as much information as you can, given the constraints, whether it's time or resources or whatever. You just grab whatever you can.
Yeah, yeah. So just take it all in and look into it and see how it's process it. So what do you process it for? So how do you know it's information that's good, that's going to support your decision? So this is where a big distinction for me, where learning really came up. And this is where the distinction between clarity and certainty showed up for me. in this learning. And at that point in time, we were pretty certain we were going to have a healthy kid. And everything we were doing, we were investing in having a healthy kid. And what we realized is that certainty was gone. And what this experience taught me is that it was never there. It was never there. But I was going through my life trying to create it, when really needed to take a step back and get more clarity about what I cared about. My wife and I, we had to have really tough conversations around what we cared about and why, and that became the filter for all the information that came in to be able to make decisions. And in the work that I do, that Jeff referred to, we talk about experiential learning as the way to get to actual learning. We call it knowledge is the movie prize, right? So when we define learning, it's not about understanding something, but it's about the ability to take a new and different action. So the mind understands, the body learns. So you learn through action, through doing things. So it's like the difference between when you learned how to drive, when you showed up at driver's school, driver's ed, and you're looking at everything up on the screen, and intellectually you knew what it was like to drive, but you didn't know until you got behind the wheel. You didn't learn how to drive until then. At this moment in time, I was driving. The world had gone a different place. So we went on a worldwide search for the different hospitals, and we were going to end up on one coast or the other. And we ended up lining up with this hospital team that when we talked to them, we were getting up the gamut from, yep, we agree, 25% chance of survival. We're going to do the best we can. We've done a number of these kids with CDH, to the data at the best hospitals on either side of the coast, one in San Francisco, one in Philadelphia. And we ended up interviewing a surgical team here in the Twin Cities, and they confirmed, yep, less than 25% chance of survival. Here's how many kids we've done in the last 10 years. Given the severity, we think this is how the types of treatments we're going to have to do, which actually increases his risk. But here's what we want you to know. That 25% is great information, and it tells where the likelihood of these kids are going to end up, but it doesn't tell us where your kid's going to end up. And we're here to fight for every single kid. So who do you think we chose? Yeah, that was the invite into this really high-performing team that we didn't actually realize at that moment. And so we had a lot of things we had to do up until birth, and we were hoping for a natural birth. As it turned out, didn't have a natural birth. He has a really big head. He got stuck, so he had to do an emergency C-section. And as he's being born, we're in a very there's over 5 additional people than what we typically in a C-section type delivery, because there's 5 more people that are helping to save this kid. And that's the moment where I learned more in my life in that minute than I did the rest of my life combined. And it didn't all show up in that minute, but that minute created context for what came before and what came after. But what did show up in that first minute was I, as a parent, first-time parent, went into this thinking that my biggest responsibility was, as a parent, was going to be protecting and creating security for my kid. That was a belief that I had going into it. In that first minute, that completely got put on its head. And what I realized was, yes, that's going to be a responsibility of mine, but a bigger responsibility is going to be giving this kid tools to operate in an insecure world. Because at that moment, I realized I didn't have control over anything. So my wife was on the surgery table. My son was taken away. She never saw him. With 5 people, put a tube down his throat. He never breathed on his own. He had to be helped to breathe. And a few hours earlier, I had just signed all these forms giving away all of our parental decision-making rights. So I wasn't even a parent at that moment. The doctors had all the decision-making rights because they had to make instantaneous decisions. They couldn't check in with us. So, have you guys collaborated to get where you want? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Thank you. So, are you currently collaborating?
Yes.
Yeah, is it an important capability to have to get some things done? Okay.
Yes.
So why? Why is it so important to collaborate?
We don't have all the skills ourselves.
Yeah, so to bring in additional skills to be able to, that are important to get to a certain goal that you have. Yeah, what else?
Skills and experiences.
Experience, yeah, so different perspectives. So why are those so important? Why are the different perspectives so important?
Give you another view, give you a chance to look at something differently, see it maybe clearer.
Yep. Yep, awesome, what else?
Product of the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, so 1 + 1 can equal 3, 5, or 6. Yep, if you bring it in. Yep, so what does it take for that to happen? So that needs to be really effective collaboration for the sum of the parts to be bigger. Right?
You really need to recognize all the parties for.
So you need to recognize them, value their input.
Correct.
Yep, cool, what else?
Trust.
Trust, how do you do that?
How do you trust them?
Yeah, well, how do you build trust?
Education.
And history with each other.
History?
Yeah.
Yep. So think about this conversation and this question until going forward because this is what I'm going to dive into for the rest of this time, okay? First, to show you what showed up. So, Kieran is his name. He's taken, puts in an incubator, 5 people are saving him. We have to go, it was at Children's Hospital in Minneapolis at the time. The babysitter wasn't there, so you had to go through a tunnel or a block underneath Abbott and 2 Children's. And so I had to leave my wife sitting or laying on the surgery table open and go with my kid into the NICU unit. And then come back, and we got a call before we could get Moira, my wife, over to see him from the main neonatologist saying things didn't go so good, we had to do surgery and put Kieran on ECMO. And ECMO is this machine that does the work of the heart and the lungs. Because what kills these kids is pulmonary hypertension, which, because the lungs weren't working, there's not enough oxygen in the blood, and the heart thinks it needs to work harder and harder and harder until it fails. And so this machine, what happens is half of your blood comes out of your body through your jugular, goes into this machine, it gets oxygenated, and then it gets pumped back into your carotid artery, and it bypasses your lungs. And what that does is it takes the pressure off your heart so that hypertension can start to get under control. And so she said he needed to have surgery. He's put on this machine. We can't have you come until 6 in the morning. And he was born at 10 and this was midnight. So we had all night before my wife was able to see her son. And this is, when we ended up at the NICU, this is what we came to. There's his head. That's the ECMO machine. And that's everything else that he was attached to. That's what my wife saw. This is him close up. So that's the cannula that's doing the breathing for him. You can see those 2 tubes right there. That's blood going out and blood coming in. And he was on 10 different narcotics and paralytics because they couldn't afford him to move, because if he moved, he would bleed to death. And at any moment, he could have a blood clot or a stroke. So that was his life for a couple months in the NICU. And that's what we started with. And what we didn't realize is that we had picked an unbelievable team to actually take care of this kid. And they were inviting us into the process the entire time. And so he had his ups and downs. He had over 8 surgeries before he was 2. He had an annual surgery up until he was 5 because he kept on re-herniating. He was a super stud. He's been a total super stud. And about a couple of years ago, he was participating in this follow-up study with the team with Children's Hospital around these kids with severe CDH. And so we're at the hospital and Kieran's getting his tests and I'm talking to the doctor who's heading up this study, who happened to be one of the neonatologists that were in the NICU unit when Kieran was there. He goes, "Eric, I don't know if you know this, but we had just finished going through a process where we got our 10 neonatologists and our 10 surgeons, so 20 docs, all the best in the world. We got them all together and aligned around a single protocol for these kids with severe CDH." He goes, "I don't know if you know how hard it is to get 20 docs aligned and agreeing on anything, but it's not an easy process." But we did, and your kid happened to be one of the first ones to receive this new protocol. And now we have treated enough kids, and we've been participating in this study with other top hospitals around the country, and we've been able to publish our data, and the data shows that we now have the best results in the world. Oh my gosh, that is pretty amazing. And so it hit me that I need to start telling this story because it's right in the wheelhouse of what I do with work. And so this professional and personal life started colliding, and so I was able to interview the neonatologist who headed up the whole the whole effort, and then a surgeon, his surgeon, who insisted on doing all of Kieran's surgeries, who happened to be the head of pediatric surgery, and I kicked it off by interviewing the two of them, and some really interesting things came up, one in each of a bunch, but two really particular things in each interview. So I'm interviewing the neonatologist, and I asked her, I said, so what did it take to get these 20 docs all aligned around this single protocol? What did you need to do? And she said, you might be really surprised by this, Eric. And what do you think she told me? What do you think she told me?
They just asked.
Huh?
I asked them.
So she asked them.
She took the initiative to.
Yeah. So she took the initiative to say, I want to go on this journey and figure this out. Yep, that was a big piece. So she declared, you're right on there. Yep. What else? What do you think the biggest thing that she said that they needed to do to be able to get? So here's all these docs that are the best in the world. They all are doing it their way, and it's all different than everybody else. But they're doing it their way because they know it works.
Create a vision.
So create a vision, but they had to do it before that.
Collaborate.
Collaborate, drop their egos is a big part of it. Yep, they had to do that. So what she said was, we had to drop all the stuff behind our names and get connected as people. So we had to share what we cared about, why we cared about it, and understand it with each member of the team before we could start defining the issue, getting at the issue, and actually starting to collaborate to solve what we say we wanted to solve, to get to a vision, to start to figure out how to fulfill on it. And it blew me away because that's one of the biggest resistance that I see when I'm working out in the marketplace, is that so often leaders and organizations want to solve everything over in execution mode, and they don't realize they're putting a governor on what's possible because it's comfortable to solve it over there rather than coming back and being vulnerable and getting connected as people so you can blow the doors off of what happens on the execution side, because it takes time. So here's a group of people that we know have the biggest egos with the least amount of time, that took the time to do that, and they have the best results in the world. And then I'm talking to the surgeon, and I asked him, how did you get to where you're at? And he said, well, I got interested in medicine. I'm in med school. I got real interested in pediatric surgery. And he said, now it's not hard for me to show up to work every day, because at any given moment, I could potentially add 90 years onto somebody's life. It's like, not many people get to do that. Like, well, that's what you did for our kid. You gave him a shot at another 90 years. And so here's the two people that are heading up this whole effort, and they speak into some of the two biggest things that I find people have a hard time doing, which is connecting as people and getting clear about what they care about and why, to really influence the results on that side. So that kind of launched this whole story, and it lines up with some studies that have been done over the last many years. One started in 1980 with a group of guys around studying human performance. And at the time it was in the athletic domain, and they wanted to understand, why is it that two people with equal capabilities, one ends up more often on the podium than the other, and why is it that a team with less talent can kick the crap out of a team with more talent? And what they found, there was 6 of them. There was a business executive, there was a psychologist, there was an academic, there was a US ski team coach, there was a retired sergeant major, and there was a pro athlete. And what they found and rediscovered was the old Greek model of mind, body, spirit, and particularly the spirit piece. And what they found was really high-performing people, consistently high-performing people in teams have practices in all 3 domains. And on the spirit piece, it was getting clear about why you're doing what you're doing, how are you connected. So even in your daily tasks, how are your tasks connected to what you care about, to what the organization cares about. And then the next piece is, not only are you aligned around where you're going, but how are you taking care of each other along the way? So how are you creating and specifically behaving to increase trust? How are you creating a place of unconditional support rather than win-lose? Because win-lose is about right-wrong, And all of a sudden it puts another governor on what's possible. So here's a model that's been developed over the last 35 years that are supporting what these docs did. And then last year, Google came out with a study. You can see this in the New York Times about a year ago. They studied 180 of their teams, and they wanted to know what makes the perfect team. And they went in thinking, like a lot of people, that it had to do with the makeup of the team. So they really wanted to understand how to put the best people on a team. So the right personalities, the right skills, how do you put the best team together? And they got really frustrated because they weren't able to find anything consistently across 180 teams around who was on the team and that predicting outcomes. But what they did find was that it wasn't about who was on the team, it's what the team was doing. What are the standards? How are they supporting each other? How do they have empathy for each other? How are they listening to each other? Are they allowed to make mistakes? Those types of standards, they found, consistently showed high performance in whatever metric they were measuring. So, what do you think gets in the way of this?
Ego?
Ego? Yep. What about your ego?
About your ego,
Yeah, what about your ego?
and you want to be right.
Want to be right. What else?
Communication.
Communication. Yep.
The ability to listen.
Ability to listen.
Needing to be the smartest guy in the room.
Yep. So what is behind all of those? Fear. Fear of something. And the current belief system that you have in place, that we tend to have in place. And what I found, so have any of you heard of Roger Bannister? Yep, who was Roger Bannister? 4 Minute Mile. Yep. So and what about the 4 Minute Mile?
First man to break.
First man to break it. Yep, so he's the first guy to break 4 Minute Mile. Previous to him doing that, so it was May 6, 1954. Previous to him doing that, it was scientifically proven that it's not possible. Physiologically, it's not possible for a human to run below a 4 Minute Mile. And Bannister didn't, he didn't take that in. He trained and he trained and he trained. And then he went and he did it, and he had pacers to help him run the pace, and he broke the 4 Minute Mile barrier. But that's not the biggest part of the story. What's the biggest part of the story?
What happened after?
What happened after? Right. So here's this belief system about what's possible. It gets broken, and then a huge rush of performance comes in. So Bannister said, he goes, doctors and scientists said that breaking the 4 Minute Mile was impossible, that one would die in the attempt. Thus, when I got up from the track after collapsing at the finish line, I figured I was dead. Yep, so it's these fears that are showing up in us. And here's what's possible if you're able to step through it. Because what these docs did, so they had some of their own 4 Minute Mile barriers, right? They all were extreme experts at what they did, and they had to put that aside and be open. And one thing that I learned about all of these docs is they have this unbelievable addiction to learning. They just want to get better and better and better. And they know to do that, they need to fail. And one of the things, their big 4 Minute Mile barrier was that previous to, and this was how it was done, best practices across all the hospitals, people weren't, they were too scared to do surgery on people that had blood thinner in them, right? Heparin blood thinner, because of the risk. Doing surgery, blood thinner, bleed to death pretty easily. That was a practice. People, they just did whatever they could not to have blood thinner while they were in surgery. That's one of the big things that this hospital team figured out, was how to do surgery while the kids were on blood thinner, which allowed them to put them on this ECMO machine sooner to take the pressure off the heart, so the kid's energy could go towards repairing itself rather than the heart. So they were able to get kids who otherwise wouldn't have survived into a place of support when they would be waiting for a while before they could ever put them on the ECMO, because they were waiting to do surgery and waiting for the hypertension to go down on its own. So that was a huge piece of what they did. Here's what's possible when you step through it. So this is the survival rates. This is children's. This is the other hospitals in the study. So all the CDH, that means all the kids, no matter what severity they have. So some of them just have a little hole, so some intestines are up. So the hospital is at 84%, the rest is at 69%. Without ECMO, so without having to go on that machine, so less severity, 88%, 74% to other hospitals. And then this is the big one. So children's here, kids that are on ECMO, 82% survival rate now. Other hospitals, 47. So what's at stake for not stepping into your discomfort? For you, for your teams, personally, what's at stake? And what's possible? Here's what was possible for us. Is there any way to turn the light off?
Gino, how do we turn the lights down?
Right there.
So this is a film that Kieran put together for school. So you saw where he started. This is where he is.
2, 3, 4.
That's just one kid of many that this team and other teams now, because they're sharing these new protocols, are saving kids and giving this opportunity. And he's been a super stud. They thought he would be on feeding tube till he's at least 9 or 10. They thought he would have probably developmental issues because of lack of oxygen to the brain. And more and more and more of these kids are starting where Kieran was and are where he's at now. And I did this talk a few months ago, and there was a couple of his doctors in the room, a couple of the admin from the hospital, and one of the doctors that was in the room was his pulmonologist, who also happened to be one of his main neonatologists in the NICU. So he knew Kieran from the beginning, and as the pulmonologist, so his lung doctor, he's known, out of all the doctors, he's the one that saw Kieran the most, because we were there multiple times a year for him, and he saw Kieran's progression. And he came up to me after the talk, and he said, "Eric, I really appreciate hearing the parent side of the story, and a couple of things I want to share with you." He goes, people don't understand, first of all, how risky ECMO is, and they don't understand how hard it is to create lung capacity without a working diaphragm. Because what they do is they move everything down and they put a prosthetic diaphragm in, but the diaphragm just holds this stuff down. It doesn't actually help with the lungs. So he said it's really hard to create lung capacity, especially for an infant, without a working diaphragm. He said, and I'm always amazed at what is possible with these kids. He said, and what I want to share with you is the reason Kieran has the lung capacity that he has and is living the life that he is because of his attitude and your parenting. And it just blew me away. He goes, what I mean by that is if you would have let the story and all the data and all the stuff determine what you allowed that kid to do, it would have been a self-fulfilling prophecy, because he wouldn't have been challenged enough for his body to learn how to adapt the way it can adapt to live the life that he's living now. And all you need to do is just replace parent with leader. How are our own fears getting in the way of the actions we're taking, and how we're managing the people around us? Are we allowing them to make mistakes, get outside their comfort zone? Are we getting outside our own so that we can adapt and be the best that we can be? I learned it this way: difference between perceived risk and real risk. What I started to understand is when my fears came up, I was managing the perceived risk. The fear that my kid might get hurt, or I don't know if I should let him do that. And as a result of that, I was increasing the real risk of him living the life that he can live. So, thank you.
So anybody have any questions for Eric?
Any questions? None? Come on. Yeah, Jen.
Eric, talk about some client success stories where you've taken this and done it with companies.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, this is what I do with people and companies, is help them get to these types of breakthrough barriers and do these types of things. So, one kind of interesting one is a printing company that had a process that was 30 days, that was the standard process in the marketplace. And they went through a process and they got that 30 days down to 1 day. So from when and no one else could figure that out, and they completely changed the market. And they were still able to do the 30-day one at a certain price point and then do the 1-day one at a different one. But the big piece is usually just people starting to be aware for themselves, so they step into the communities that they care about and be the highest valued member accountable to that outcome. So it really starts with the individual person, with their awareness and their commitment to something bigger than them. Any other questions? No?
So Eric and I are working on a workshop coming too soon. The working title is Getting Shit Done. Just using some of this barriers that people create in their businesses and a system to really make sure you understand what you're trying to accomplish and how you drive it through your organization to get more stuff done. So look for that. Eric.